Most people tell this story as a footnote, a late night, a piano, two musicians talking after a show. But for Aretha Franklin, that footnote was the night someone finally told her the truth about her own voice. It was the winter of 1966, inside a half-empty Chicago nightclub, long after the audience had gone home. The chairs were stacked along the walls. The stage lights had been cut down to a single amber bulb above the piano, and the air still carried the smell of cigarette smoke and spilled bourbon from a few hours earlier. Ray Charles sat at the piano, his dark glasses catching the low light, his fingers moving over the keys without any urgency, the way a man plays when he is not performing for anyone. Across the room, Aretha Franklin stood near the bar with her coat still on, not quite ready to leave, not quite sure why she was still there. She had opened for him that night, one stop on a long run of package shows that had become her life. Detroit to Chicago, Chicago to St. Louis, city after city, theater after theater. She sang well. She always sang well. But something in her had started to feel worn down, the way a record sounds after it has been played too many times on the same needle. By 1966, Aretha Franklin had been recording for Columbia Records for 6 years. She had a beautiful voice and a catalog of songs that did not quite know what to do with it. Jazz standards, show tunes, pop arrangements with string sections that softened her into something polished and careful. Critics called her promising. Audiences respected her. But the fire that had filled her father's church on Hastings Street in Detroit, the fire that had made grown men weep during a Sunday service, had not yet found its way onto a record. She knew it. She felt it every night, standing in the wings before a show, listening to the band tune up, wondering if tonight would be the night the right song finally arrived. It never quite was. Ray Charles knew it too. He had heard her sing for years, first as a teenager on gospel programs, then on the same bills they sometimes shared. He had never said much about it. Ray was not a man who offered opinions unless he believed they mattered. But that night, something made him stay at the piano after the club had emptied, and something made him call her name. "Come here a minute," he said, not loudly, the way a man speaks when he already expects to be heard. Aretha walked over slowly, set her coat down on a bar stool, and stood near the piano. Ray did not look up. He kept playing, a loose blues figure in the left hand, nothing written down, nothing rehearsed. "Sit down," he said. She sat beside him on the bench, the way she had sat beside countless piano players growing up, in church basements, in living rooms, in rehearsal halls. It was a position she knew better than almost anyone alive. But this time the man beside her was Ray Charles, and the silence between his words felt heavier than it usually did. For a while, neither of them spoke. He played, she listened. The blues figure shifted, opened up, found a chord progression that felt familiar to her, something close to the music she had grown up with, something closer to church than to the Columbia arrangements she had been recording. Then Ray asked her a question, not about her contract, not about her label. He asked her where she had learned to sing. It was such a simple question that for a moment Aretha almost laughed. Everyone knew where she had learned to sing. It was in her father's church, under Reverend C. L. Franklin's pulpit, surrounded by some of the greatest gospel voices in the country. It was the answer she had given in a dozen interviews. But Ray was not asking for an interview answer. He asked again, differently this time. He asked her what it had felt like, not where, but what it felt like, the first time she sang in that church and felt the whole room respond to her. Aretha was quiet for a long moment. She thought about it, really thought about it, in a way she realized she had not done in years. She thought about being a girl standing on a chair so she could reach the microphone, about the way the congregation would rise to its feet before she had even finished a phrase, about her father watching from the pulpit with an expression she had spent her whole life trying to understand. "It felt like I didn't have to ask anybody for anything," she said quietly. "Like the song already belonged to me before I sang it." Ray nodded slowly, still playing, and for the first time that night, he smiled. "That's the voice I keep hearing under all that other stuff," he said. "The records, the arrangements, all that polish. It's good, it's professional, but it's not that voice." He was not criticizing her. Aretha understood that immediately. He was naming something she had felt, but had never quite been able to say out loud. A gap between the singer she had become on record and the singer she had always been in that church. The singer who did not have to ask anybody for anything. "You don't need anybody to give you permission," Ray said. "That's the part people forget. They hear a voice like yours and they think it needs to be managed, arranged, smoothed out. But a voice like that, it already knows what it's supposed to do. Somebody just has to stop getting in its way." He told her, without naming names, without criticizing anyone directly, that the songs she had been given were not wrong exactly. They were simply not hers. And until she found songs and a sound that belonged to her the way that childhood church had belonged to her, audiences would keep respecting her without ever truly being moved by her. Aretha sat with that for a long time. She did not argue. She did not defend the records she had made. She simply listened, the way she had been taught to listen her whole life, to preachers, to choir directors, to her father, to the music itself. When she finally stood up to leave that night, Ray did not tell her what to do next. He did not mention contracts or labels or producers. He simply went back to playing, the same loose blues figure, as if the conversation had been only a small interruption in a much longer piece of music. But Aretha carried that conversation with her. Within a year, her contract with Columbia would end. Within 2 years, she would be sitting at a different piano in a small studio in Muscle Shoals, recording a song called "I Never Loved a Man the Way I Love You," with a sound that reached directly back to that church on Hastings Street, the sound Ray Charles had heard underneath everything else. She never publicly credited that one night for the change. There were many reasons, many people, many decisions that led her from Columbia to Atlantic, from polished arrangements to the raw, gospel-rooted sound that would define her. But those close to her in later years would say that something shifted in her after that winter in Chicago. A quiet permission she gave herself, the kind Ray Charles had told her she already had. Ray Charles, for his part, rarely spoke about that night either. He was not a man who collected stories about his own influence, but musicians who knew him said he kept an ear on Aretha's records after 1967, and that when Respect and Natural Woman began filling the radio, he would sometimes nod along without saying anything at all, the way a man nods when something he recognized a long time ago has finally arrived where it was always going. It is easy to think of Aretha Franklin's transformation as something that happened in a studio, with the right producer, the right musicians, the right song. And in many ways, it did. But before any of that, there was a piano in an empty Chicago club, a question about a childhood church, and a quiet truth spoken by a man who had already found his own voice and recognized hers underneath all the rest. He did not give her a new sound that night. He only reminded her that she already had one, and that it had been hers all along.